Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. And this is our Halloween movie madness. I'm not sure what happened to our co-host this week, but no one's been able to show up. I'm a little bit afraid that the Killer Tomatoes may have gotten them, which gives you a good idea of what movie we're talking about today. That's right. It's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, the cult classic comedy horror movie, a parody movie from the 1970s. Going to be talking about that movie. I'm also going to be featuring a sneak peek of our interview with horror writer Bill Richardson, which will debut this week on Comic Crusaders YouTube channel as part of our Cinema Crusaders Halloween movie madness. But before we get going, I'm just going to give you a little look at the trailer from 1978's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, our featured movie this week.
Across this great nation, almost everyone has been affected in one way or another by this terrible tomato onslaught. Mrs. Williams, I understand your husband is missing.
Yes,
Do you think he's dead?
Well,
Will you miss him?
Well,
Will you marry again? What if he's laying in a ditch somewhere, with both his legs broken, calling your name? You will have to find another man, you know. You're no spring chicken.
Lives are shattered. The nation is in chaos. Death and destruction sweeps the country. Foursquare Productions presents perhaps the funniest film ever made.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You've never seen a film like it. This is the incredible story of the world's ultimate disaster. Vicious man-eating tomatoes grow to monstrous proportions. Faced with this unprecedented menace, the president calls upon Mason Dixon, special agent. Aided by his trusty sidekick, Dixon begins to unravel the terrifying mystery of the deadly tomatoes. Dixon is getting close, too close for someone, or something. Who could it be? The girl reporter? The ad executive? The press secretary? Or does it go higher? Join Mason Dixon in a race against time as he battles to save the world from the threat of nature's perfect eating machine, the Killer Tomato.
Ain't no time to make a fuss. We gotta get those tomatoes before they get us.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You've never seen anything like it.
Excuse me, I was muted there. So, wait a minute, hold on. It looks like we have a co-host who has just popped in. I am very glad to welcome him. The tomatoes didn't get him, which makes me very happy as well. I'm going to welcome in Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
This is what happened to the tomatoes that tried to get me.
Outstanding. So you just missed it. I just finished showing the trailer for 1978's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and we got a little taste of the theme song of the movie, which is just classic. You know, it was my ringtone for a long time. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You know, you can't go wrong with that. So, yeah, really looking forward to talking about this movie. So let's get right into it. You know, let's just jump right in with both feet. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, 1978. I'm just going to throw this out there. First of all, there have been a lot of comedy horror movies over the years. Starting all the way back at silent films, 1922, the first comedy horror movie was made. Kind of started off back then. But I would say, and I would venture, you know, this is my humble opinion, that Attack of the Killer Tomatoes really kicked off and Piranha, which also came out the same year in 1978, kicked off the modern comedy horror parody movie that also was satirical. You know, this movie, you know, we're going to get into it. It takes a lot of shots at a lot of different things just for fun, just for comedy, you know, and, you know, movies following up in that vein would be Scary Movie, You'd have, I mean, all the scary movies, Shaun of the Dead. I mean, there's just so many. It's become a genre unto itself. So I think this movie, even though it's small, it's probably not the greatest movie of all time, was really kind of broke a lot of ground and let other people do something different and break into a different genre, which, you know, I think is genre on its own and a genre that I love. So what do you think, Jeff? What do you think about Attack the Killer Tomatoes? How did it, you know, resonate with you?
First, I'll say one thing is like I don't consider Piranha to be a horror comedy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely inspired by Jaws. It's definitely one of these films that took off and took advantage of the man against nature sort of theme of Jaws. That'd be followed up by things like Grizzly and other films. But I can. There's definitely satire in it, but I don't consider it a horror comedy. I am curious what this 1922 film. What's the first horror comedy?
The very first horror comedy, 1922, and I actually went and checked it out. Actually, the one I was thinking of in 1922 was called The Ghostbreaker, and actually Bob Hope would remake that called The Ghostbreakers later on in the 1930s. But there was one in 1920 called Haunted Spooks. So
okay. I'll have to look those up.
Yeah,
like that's quite a landmark in cinema history right there. So I'm definitely interested in checking that out.
Not only that, the 1920 movie was made in the South. It's a Southern Gothic horror comedy. So
even better as a Southern boy. I gotta love that. Represent.
Yeah.
As for what I think about this film has long time been a favorite of mine. I'm a big fan of both comedy and horror. And this thing is so spooftacular. And you're talking about like the theme song earlier on. That's another thing a lot of people don't realize about this movie. This movie is actually a bit of a musical. There's several musical numbers in it, and they're all written by the creator of the movie. So that's a lot of fun there. A really talented guy.
Wasn't he the one that ended up becoming a California state senator eventually?
I don't know. I didn't do a great deal of research ahead of time, but one thing I wanted to know right away, because watching this film, I'd forgotten just how many visual gags were in it, because it's been a long time since I saw it. I like one of my favorites is the tiny room that all the generals first meet in. That's completely hysterical. And my favorite gag, the setup is great, where they have the Japanese scientist who's overdubbed. You know, all of his lines are dubbed, and he gets up to do his presentation. And he knocks over a picture of a ship, and so a Japanese dude just sinks a picture of the USS Arizona into a fish tank. So it's like a Pearl Harbor joke just crammed in there, beautifully done. Well, but the sight gags were so good, I had to go and see if this film inspired Zaz, Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker, or if it was the other way around. It turns out their first movie, the Kentucky Fried Movie, actually came out the previous year. So I'm guessing, but you know, these two could have both been in production at the same time, just parallel thinking and similar humor. But I completely digressed away from your point. I think this film is a lot of fun. It's a classic. It's classically bad, but on purpose. I'm impressed not just by the clever sight gags that are throughout, and very much the sort of Police Academy Zucker's Abrams Zucker way, but also the fact that they made use of actors who weren't very good to people who were just not actors at all, and at the same time they stuffed some real actors in there, some incredible actors who just kind of elevate things where they need to be elevated, and just really enjoy using people who've got no acting chops at all, and everybody in between. And it's very skillfully handled. And I was also surprised watching it again for the first time in several years, the level of production, the fact that like one of the earliest scenes, they flip and crash a helicopter. I was like,
for real,
they spent some legit money on this thing.
Well, funny story about that.
Mm-hmm.
That helicopter was supposed to land, and when they were bringing it in, the pilot actually crashed the helicopter for real.
It's too good not to leave in the shot.
Yeah, and he got out. He was fine. He escaped the crash alive. But that's a real crash. That helicopter was just supposed to come in and land.
Well, I tell you, my hats are off to the actors who are in the scene. Is this whirlybird, and it's one of those types of choppers. Whirlybird is flying crazy circles around him, and it crashes by him, and they just look back and then just keep going with their lines. What pros?
Yeah,
what absolute pros.
It's absolutely amazing. Yeah, the whole budget for this film, for all you out there who are movie makers, was $100,000 for the entire movie. You know, and even back in 1978, that was not a ton of money for a movie. You know,
no. Think about like John Carpenter's Halloween. He made that for about $300,000, and that was considered like ultra low budget at the time.
Mm-hmm. So another thing before we get into, our standard format for the movie, one of the other things I love about this movie is, like you said, it's a musical. So I think it's borrowing on that Mel Brooks tradition of comedy and parody with musical numbers in it. And they're not the greatest in the world, but they're so, like you said, the whole movie is so bad, it's good. And the music and the musical performances are so cheesy and over the top that they're incredibly wonderful and comedic. Yeah. They're really, you just love to watch them. The other thing I love is that, and I want to talk about this when we get into for modern audiences, I didn't realize how much political humor and shots at the government is in this movie. That went right over my head as a kid. And I have to say, for this podcast, I got a hold of the Elvira movie macabre version from 1984 for us to watch. So that was fun to watch as well. The last thing is, and I'm racking my brain trying to think if this was one of the first movies to do it, and I think it was. In later comedy horror movies like Scary Movie and everything, the whole thing is a parody of contemporary horror movies. Yeah, this one did that as well. There's a Jaws scene in there with the tomatoes coming up in the ocean. There's a couple the other movies that it parodies as well. So I think this is the first time that you have like a comedy horror that parodies specific horror movies in the genre. So, and really the critics just lambasted this movie. I mean, it was expected to go nowhere, and it was so popular with the general public that it spawned 3 sequels, which is just amazing.
And a cartoon.
Yeah. So, and it lives on.
For those of you out there, George Clooney is in the second film.
Is he really?
Young George Clooney.
Wow. Okay. I have never seen any of the sequels. I've only seen the original. And fun Nemesis fact here.
Oh, wow. I think there might have even been like a brief live action TV series, but I do remember for sure there was a cartoon. So it's got some legs on it.
See, this was nostalgia for me because I saw the original. I'm a huge fan of Elvira and Cassandra Peterson. Mm-hmm. I saw the original on Movie Macabre. 13 years old, watched the movie in 1984 and loved it. So just watching it again took me back and seeing all the old commercials and everything. It was really incredible. But just seeing her intros and outros in the movie, just so much fun. Loved it. And it was great to be transported. And I haven't watched this movie in a long time. So it was really, really a lot of fun. Oh, you there?
Yeah. Sorry. My wife is like pressure cooking. It's very noisy. So I had to mute the mic.
No worries. So let's get into it. And I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to say specifically about actors in this movie, and production value, but we'll do our best, especially since the actors, I don't think anyone is going to know any of them. So let's talk about production value of the film first. You could tell this movie was made on a budget. It's shot on film, but it's not the best work on film ever, but it works really well. And I'd say, if I had to grade it, I'd say it's a step above a student film, which is what this movie started as. Originally, it was a student film project from one of the writers or the directors in what I think they were going to school in San Francisco. And then it turned into a whole movie. the sets, it's all over California. I love that the
New
last
York.
yeah, the last battle is in San Diego Stadium, and it features the San Diego chicken, which was a staple of my childhood growing up, going to Padre games and everything else. So that was incredibly wonderful. I just loved it. And like I said,
well, I
think
love how they'll throw up the location. It'll say New York, and you'll see things like the Golden Gate Bridge or a trolley car. New York with a question mark. It's the sort of thing like you'd see in Austin Powers when he's driving by, like, oh, look, this looks nothing like the California countryside, does it? I love humor like that.
It was just a really fun, and it was shot, basically all of it was in the state of California, just up and down the state. And I don't even know if they got outside Southern California, because that looked like stock footage of San Francisco a couple times. So, and then, like I said, the helicopter crashing, I mean, how fortuitous to turn that in. And they didn't have to pay for it, because all they did was rent the helicopter. So the guy, crashed it. It's out of their money. So
we got a free stunt.
Yeah. So
I love they even throw in a line about, like, screw the pilot.
Yeah. Which is funny. But I mean, for everybody out there who's worried about the pilot did get out. He got out alive. He was fine. So, which is probably why they threw it into.
Yeah, it's so great. The couple of guys who are supposed to have gotten out of the crash, and like, what about the pilot? And they're like, screw the pilot.
Yeah. So what'd you think of the production value of the film? I mean,
again, I thought for a low budget film, I thought the production value was actually surprisingly good. I'm not surprised to hear this started out as a student film. There have been a lot of important filmmakers over the years whose student film ended up becoming a feature. Oftentimes their first feature, like George Lucas's student film went on to become his first movie, THX 1138, which starred Robert Duvall. So, he got some quality people in it right away. I think the same thing happened with, like, Francis Ford Coppola, maybe. Can't remember the other guy right now. The guy who did okay, not gonna let it hang out there in dead air, but yeah, like I said, right away, that some of the opening scenes, they've rented a helicopter. They got a helicopter in there. They've got a crop duster flying overhead several times. They have lots of action with vehicles going on, and to build all the giant tomatoes, that took a bit of money, even if they look better than this, but for all I know, they could have been paper mache, chicken wire, and wood, and they had to have been pretty light, because they put them on, like, casters so they could roll them around. So you can see where they spent the money, and you can see where they didn't have money for things. They didn't have money for big sets, but they very cleverly maximized that by, like I said, my favorite sight gag is the tiny room that they stick all the generals in, and doing clever things like, we'll just stick them in these random hotel rooms, or like these little easy to convert little boardroom kind of settings. So I think it was like I think the production value, while not the best, they do show that they did have production value. There's a couple of times I can tell they didn't have the kind of money to shoot shots the way I would have. Like, I think the song and dance scene, for instance, with the mass marketing guy, the Jewish Hollywood producer dude, I would have shot that a little bit differently. I'd have had some longs, some shorts, some mediums in there, and then they kind of staged it a little bit more in that kind of like a play-like staging, because you can just kind of get it all in one with just a couple of little close-up cuts here and there. So I feel like they did the best with what they had, and when they didn't have it, they tried to make it funny, which is good.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that they had one camera, maybe two at most, but they made good use of the camera work. Some of the shots were pretty inventive. Like, there were a lot of shots where they were following tomatoes as they were chasing people. There's one in particular where there's a chase scene. I'd love to know how they got the, I guess, medium-sized giant tomatoes. So they're about I guess a foot and a half across to roll and actually chase after people, because I don't think that anybody was bowling them along and keeping them that straight, so they must have had some sort of remote control car or something in there that was, they were driving.
Because like when I think about, again, the song and dance number you're talking about, they probably only had one, maybe two cameras. And so you can't get the kind of coverage that you can on a really heavily funded feature that doesn't give you all those angles. So, and we've seen that time and time again when a production doesn't have money, that the creators have to get really creative, and this shows just how creative you can get on a shoestring.
Yeah, but the funny part is I think that adds to the charm of the film.
Yeah,
especially since it's in the 70s. It has that really like low budget schlocky feel to it. You almost expect porn music to start at any moment when they're in the the office of the ad executive and everything.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just like it's got that feel to it. It's got the color to it, and I know it's the time, but it immediately takes you back to that time of the 70s. Starsky and Hutch and Chips and all, the whole thing. Which, by the way, Starsky and Hutch and Chips had much higher production value than this movie did.
What's so funny about this, though, because of the topical humor that's in it, and it has this caption at one point. It says "present day," and I was thinking, like, even though this guy's wearing like this garish style, and you can see the technology isn't up to date, it's still kind of timeless in a way, because these are the humor that they're picking on is the sort of thing that we've just seen again and again and again. It just always comes back around. So this movie's still enjoyable, generation after generation.
I want you to keep that in mind when we come to, for modern audiences, because at Comic-Con in 2019, a smaller studio announced that they want to remake this film. And I think that would be a mistake, but I want to hit that later on, and really dive into that, what you think about that as well. So,
sure.
But before we get there, let's talk about the cast of almost thousands. I think it might be thousands. I think it literally was a cast of thousands, and it was obvious that the people that were in this movie were not getting paid a lot. Some of them were getting paid almost nothing because they gave them no lines on purpose. So it was like, how are we going to get these people for not much money? Well, we'll give them no lines, and then they don't even get paid scale. They get just paid, per diem or something to come on the film. So, some of the performances, the guy who plays Mason Dixon is funny. I think he kind of looks like could have been John Belushi's brother. He really does. I'm surprised that he never appeared in much more than this movie. I think he was in an episode of Gunsmoke and a couple other smaller things, and that was it. And he's probably the most famous actor in this whole movie.
Yeah, so. I was looking up the cast, and like just going over the names, I can't recognize anybody, but I swear the guy who played the G-Man, who was always trying to do the cover up, and the revealed villain of the piece, I know I've seen them in other things, but like I don't even recognize their names enough looking at it on my phone to like pick their names out. But for me, those were the two standout actors. They were clearly the best actors on set.
I know that I recognize the guy who turns out to be the villain of the film. He played like bit parts or extras or like recurring guest spots in like some TV shows and things like that. I remember him seeing in the 70s. The leading actress never appeared in another film ever again. So, and she wasn't bad. She just was obviously new at what she was doing. Some of the performances just absolutely terrible. So, and that kind of adds to the charm of the film, because it's obvious that
one scene that has always stuck with me over the years is like, because these people, I'm just guessing, I wonder how many people they just ask, like, oh, you got a home, can we shoot it? Hey, would you like to be in a scene? And sometimes that's how you get extras, is the old man and the old woman sitting on their couch in front of their picture window, and they're like, there's a giant tomato. I didn't know they could get that big. Oh, it ate little Timmy. Oh, too poor Timmy. He ate him all up. And it's like, it's such a deadpan delivery. That's the perfect sort of thing you do when you have people who are not actors. And like when I was making my own short films around town here, because you rely on people, if you don't have money to hire, actual actors, if you're smart, you write for the people and you're like, okay, I know this guy's got this sort of personality, so I write that kind of character in. And I feel like there are cases where they sort of did that here.
Well, it's funny too, is that I know that the last scene, like I mentioned before, that took place in the old, at that time it was called San Diego Stadium, and then eventually it was called Jack Murphy Stadium, and then Qualcomm, and then it's only used, I think, for college football now. But my aunt is in that scene. So they put an ad out in the San Diego Union Tribune and just said, anybody who wants to come down, we're going to be filming a movie and you can be in it. And they rented for a very short amount of time to be able to go into the San Diego Stadium, and then just had the people in there and said, go. And they all run out. And the San Diego Chicken showed up because he saw it. So they didn't even pay him, which is incredible. And then they just all start stomping on tomatoes, which begs the question, how much money did they?
I when I watch that scene, I wonder how many, if the ads are like, hey, just wear something silly. Because, I don't know how much of that was production staging. Like, all of a sudden, here's a guy with, like, one of those, I don't know what you call, like, the chic kind of head covering that some people wear. And there's another guy, looks like he's got, like, masking tape and paper all over his face. Just, it was like when you go see, not The Price is Right, but that old game show where Let's Make a Deal, where they'd have to have, people in costume. It's like, did they have a casting call from, like, was Let's Make a Deal next door? Come on down. Where's something and be in the scene?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. That whole scene. And literally the funniest part about it is Mason Dixon, one of the characters, tells his sidekick, and I can't even remember the guy's name, but he's supposed to be the uber, like, military guy, and he's dragging a parachute with him the whole time and everything like that. He just tells him, hey, go get everybody in the town and bring them to the stadium. So that's basically what they did in real life, is just put out a casting call. Yeah.
Ben Letter. And I love the gag that he's always dragging that doggone parachute, and they keep that throughout the series and even the cartoon, that his chute's always out. He's always running with it. And, they staged such an incredible chase scene where the bad guy is going over and under and through all sorts of obstacles that would very clearly tangle his chute. And instead of going around anything, he just always follows him in that straight line, dragging that chute everywhere he goes. I love it.
I mean, and to just, I mean, the comedic effects are, I mean, they really hit on a lot of very funny things. Like, at one point, the chute gets caught in a car door and he's being dragged during a car chase, but then both cars conk out. So then he's pulling one car in the car chase. So,
and the wordplay, like in the tiny room meeting, they're going over, like, they're bagging on, like, military acronyms. And it was like, oh, what are you heading up? I've got Project Pogo 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 Pogo. It was like, oh, yeah. So what's the poop on? It's just, it just so feels like something made by the guys who made Police Academy and Airplane. So they must have all been going to film school at the same time, I think, because they're definitely influenced. They got the same influences.
I think it's great that you bring up Police Academy and Police Squad, which with
Police Squad, that's what I meant. Police Squad.
Yeah. But all of those movies, they have that same feel. It's that same type of humor, and it's in this movie, and just because the movie was on a smaller budget and it's a horror movie, you could see the influence. And there were a lot of movies coming out right around this time that had that type of humor. You had Airplane that came out. You had, you could easily have seen one of the famous lines from Airplane in this movie where they're saying, the shit is going to hit the fan, and then, they actually throw it against the fan, I mean, that's like the type of humor we're talking about.
To see that.
Yeah. I mean, that is the type of humor we're talking about here. And I don't know, I may be saying a lot about my parents, but I remember seeing, just a little history for me. I saw that movie in the theater as it played as a double feature at the old Rialto Theater in Redlands, which with Indiana Jones and the first, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first one played as a double feature with that. And funny fact, that theater is the theater that they used for the opening in Scream 2. So, so to bring it back to horror. So, so yeah, it was interesting. I remember the first time I watched Scream 2 and I was looking at it and I was like, wait a minute, I recognize that. And then I knew it was that theater because it says Rialto Theater above it. And then you go into the bathroom and for whatever reason, the bathroom's in a small theater and it's a duplex. There's only 2 screens. Are they have this Egyptian hieroglyphs and stuff all over it. So it's like, I don't know what that's about. So before we get into
Egyptians were well known for their theater.
Yes, of course. So before we get into the last half of our show here, I want to feature a sneak peek at an interview that's going live this week with horror creator Bill Richardson. Yeah. So let me bring that in real quick and you guys can enjoy this and we'll be back in just a few moments. I'm very happy to introduce to you all Bill Richardson. Welcome, Bill.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Dave. Appreciate you letting me be on today. The first thing I want to do is give you a big thank you. My first comic book graphic novel attempt, you rated as one of your top 5 books of the year, indie books of the year. And you've been a big supporter of my work for a long time. And I just really, really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And, you know, while we're mentioning that, I want to flash that cover up on the screen right now. 1,000 Nightmares. This is one of the first horror books I reviewed for Comic Crusaders. Your More Than Evil book. And this is available on Amazon.com right now, correct?
Yeah, the prose book is on Amazon.com, and I've just released an audiobook version of it that's on Audible.
Great. And if you don't mind, I've got a clip from the audiobook queued up. We could go ahead and take a listen to that real quick. And then
awesome.
Talk a little bit about it. All right, let's do it.
Treasuries rose early in the session.
From Hollywood, the one, the only Lawrence Welk and his champagne music.
Thank you so very much, my good friends, and hello, everybody. Here we have an old favorite. 1, 2, 3.
Chapter 26. Bob Clark stared out his living room window, impatiently waiting for his daughter to return from her date. Even when relaxing at home, he wore a button-down shirt and sharply creased slacks. In his life and in his career as a school administrator, informality had always made him uncomfortable. Discipline was the only thing that kept the world from descending into chaos. Behind him, his wife Janet sat in her rose-colored Raoul chair, watching television. Bob turned away from the window and started ranting again. Damn it, she should have been home hours ago. Janet made no response, so he began to pace agitatedly across their perfectly appointed living room. That girl must learn that when I give her a curfew, I mean it. There was still no reply, and he stopped pacing long enough to glare at his wife. Am I the only one worried here? Janet looked up from the TV for the first time. Not a strand of her iron hair was out of place. She was a 30-year veteran of what she had come to think of as the Bob Wars, and had long ago numbed herself to his tirades. Relax. We taught her to take care of herself. She'll be home soon. Her husband peered out the window again. I can't relax. I had that Burns kid in the 8th grade, and he was a little monster. Just then, the little monster burst through the window Bob Clark was standing in front of and landed on his back. Bob yelled, and Rick Burns drove the stiletto fangs he had acquired at the overlook into the man's shoulder. On the other side of the room, Janet jumped out of her chair and screamed. The scream was cut short, though, when her daughter Heather exploded through the window behind her. Heather hit her mother along with a volley of broken glass, and they both tumbled to the floor. As they struggled, Janet turned over just in time to see her daughter's bristling incisors plunge into her eyes. Janet shrieked insanely, but Heather did not let up. She continued to tear and rend while her mother drowned in her own spurting blood. On the floor across the room, Rick Burns was playing with his food. Instead of going for the kill immediately, he was gleefully pounding Bob Clark's head into the floor. Every time he smashed Bob's face against the glistening, well-polished wood, there was a wet crack. After that, he'd peer into the man's dazed eyes until he made a sound of protest. Then Rick would slam his head against the floor again. Eventually, the bloody...
do something different. And so the evil in this is different than what you're used to, but it still has a certain amount of familiarity. The book rock and rolls. Everything I do, I try to do really fast paced. My number one rule is don't be boring. And so it's set, it's rural horror. It's in a really isolated, remote place, one of the poorest places in the country, which is exactly like it was where I grew up. The audiobook, I wanted to do something that was different than the prose book. I wanted it to be a separate work. So I got the idea. I found a narrator that I really liked who could give sort of a rural edge to it. And then I wanted to take it up a notch. And so I used my years of filmmaking experience to do the sound design for it. And just so that it would be different. And to your question about the Lawrence Welk bit, one of the things that, is in the vein of trying to make it different, there is some sort of black humor in the audiobook that's not in the book, and some sort of straight out humor. And most of that I've done with audio effects or with the music. And in the case
bring that up real quick. And this also is something that's near and dear to my heart. This is another book you have out, Hellfighters. As I think everybody out there could tell, it looks to have a lot of similarities to H.P. Lovecraft there. We've got the classic. I was on mute. My apologies.
Yeah.
So that's a look at our interview with Bill Richardson, which is going to go live this week. And I think it's really interesting.
That looks really good, and I got to say, I like the extra production value he's doing with the audiobook, because one of the things I enjoy doing is I like to listen to radio plays. So that appeals to me even more than just a flat out audiobook, which I enjoy listening to while I'm drawing.
Yeah, it's really great. I think his horror stuff is incredible. If you haven't picked up 1,000 Nightmares, go pick it up. If you can find a copy of it, was an amazing book as well. He was so nice to send me some hard copies, and we're going to do some giveaways for Bill's stuff on Halloween. So we're going to have some giveaways of both Hellfighters and More Than Evil. So we're going to do some stuff.
Can Comic Crusaders enter?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. So, yeah, we're going to be doing that, and I think it's really worth looking at. And one of the things that before we get back to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes that I think is so interesting is that he is bringing a new twist to horror that you don't often see, especially in More Than Evil. Hellfighters is set in the backwoods of Rhode Island, which, if you've never been there, is an incredibly scary place. I've been there after dark in the middle of the night, lost. It is like something straight out of Friday the 13th. You don't know where the hell you are, and it is dark and spooky. But More Than Evil is set in Appalachia, which is where he grew up. So, very, very cool. So I think it is a spooky atmosphere in the United States that is not used enough, I think.
Okay, so a mountain town, that gives you the isolation he was talking about.
Yeah. So I think it is definitely worth checking out. It's worth listening to the interview, especially since we'll get back to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes real quick, but Bill is also a history professor, and he's a subject matter expert on Appalachia and specifically the Hatfields and the McCoys. So he knows a lot about that area and everything. So he brings a lot of that experience. Great guy, great interview. Definitely worth picking up his books. They're really incredible. So let's get back to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So I think this is going to be the best segment for this movie, because this is the segment where we talk about, what is its appeal to modern audiences? And I want to kick it over to you, Jeff, first, and then we'll just have a back and forth since it's just us. How do you think this movie will translate to modern audiences? And then as a follow-up to that, I was mentioning that they're talking about remaking this film. They announced they want to remake it. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea? So without further ado, kick it off.
The thing about older movies is they're very much a product of their time. Now, I feel like having watched this again for the first time in, maybe 2 decades, it's been a minute since I've seen it. I still feel like it had this certain timeless quality because the humor that they're using is stuff that's still relatable. And even with them going in politics, it feels very relevant for today, because it's it's kind of easy politics to make fun of. It's kind of easy to make fun of the government. It's easy to make fun of the president. It's easy to make fun of law enforcement and the military and things like that. And this sort of humor never really goes out of style. It comes back. It's very cyclical.
And to give you all, sorry to interrupt real quick, but give you all out there an example of the type of political humor we're talking about. This isn't partisan political humor. At one point, there's a Senate panel that's supposed to be investigating the tomatoes that are attacking across the nation. And they start off at the beginning of the movie, and literally they couldn't find, excuse my language for a minute, their ass from their elbow. They're sitting there, they're all old, they're falling asleep. And
well, how about the one he's like, what are we meeting about again?
Yeah. And through the whole movie, they're meeting. They never solve anything. In fact, they never get to the topic. So the whole movie stretches over, probably a couple of weeks. It's supposed to take place in time, and they're still meeting. So it's just a parody and a satire about how just ineffective.
I mean, like here's another gag I thought was so effective, and something I didn't realize that happened in the White House until Joe Biden got in office. There's this clip of him signing executive orders. And every time he signs a new executive order, they give him a fresh pen. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why do they give him? Why would you do that? It just immediately your brain starts going into like government waste. You got to have a fresh pen for each executive order he signs. He slides the order out of the way with the pen. So what do we see in this movie? Almost like a 40 almost 50 years ago, we see a president, and he's constantly. His aide has hands full of pens, and he keeps getting new pens. There's the new pens to use, and the old pens he's disposing of, and he's constantly writing and signing stuff. And then they focus on that, and it just says presidential practice signing sheet. And he's just practicing signing his name, just paper after paper. And I laughed so hard watching that because it just took me back to that moment of like Biden's first day in office. It's like. Yeah. This stuff is timeless. It's just here. It just never goes away.
Well, it's funny you say that. I didn't realize it until Trump's first day in office, and they were doing it. And it's so ridiculous. In real life, I'm surprised they haven't used it more, because they'll sign part of the signature and then give the pin, and people are lining up to get these pins and keep them. It's like,
so that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's all souvenir crap. And it's like, sorry, I'm exhibiting how just frustrated I am with the political class here as a general rule. I mean, it's just so stupid, and they've all got their little pins, it's like, I have my pins.
And this movie brilliantly lampoons that. And that's why I feel like it's timeless. And there's the whole charming aspect, because things are a product of the time, the technology, the styles, the way people act. This is all captured. This is a photograph. It's in a frame. This is a moment in time that will never be again, even if it does have relevance moving forward. And this is why I think a remake will be a travesty. I mean, this thing had enough legs on its own to become a cult classic, to spawn a couple of sequels, to spawn other media such as animation. And I think there was a live action show, if I'm not mistaken, that had John Astin, Gomez Addams, was in that. I think George Clooney might have stepped into that one as well.
Wow.
Fact check me on that, people out there.
Let me look.
Clooney was involved. But if you try and remake a movie like this, even with the best intentions, you can't recreate that. You'll be recreating something with the idea of it. And I don't see how you can possibly achieve that level of kind of cult classic success. Our taste in humor is so different. The way that it's going to be shot is going to be very different. The effects are going to be very different. And you might make an enjoyable movie, but I just don't think it's a good idea. I think it'd be better to do your own spoof and try and capture the magic that way. Come up with an idea that you think is funny and maybe relevant if that's the way you want to go. But I think trying to recreate the tomatoes is a mistake. it'd be like somebody trying to recreate the Toxic Avenger, and if you're not, Lloyd Kaufman, don't do it.
There was a Attack of the Killer Tomatoes TV show. John Astin was in it, 21 episodes. He played Dr. Putrid Gangrene.
Yes.
And they brought back Finletter. He was in the
Finletter's in everything.
Yeah. So he was there as well. Yeah, I will say I agree with you. In fact, remaking the film, I would worry that they'd almost bring too much production value to it.
Yeah, that exactly. They're going to have more cameras. They're going to have better effects, even on a micro budget.
Yeah.
Even things that I could achieve on my own, with the limited resources I had, would other than renting out stadiums or helicopters and things like. Yeah, I've done better special effects than what they had in the movie, but that wasn't really the point. But it's not gonna be equivalent.
Yeah. Plus, I'm afraid that they would do something like CGI the tomatoes or something, which would just absolutely ruin it, because the bigger tomatoes are obviously just big like paper mache or blow up stuff that is kind of like being pushed forward or something.
But it's so charming. It's so charming, delightfully charming these days.
Yeah. And it's charming because it's ridiculous, because these people are legitimately acting terrified of something, and you're looking at it, you're like, what is going on here? It's almost like the Blob movie, but the Blob was scarier than this. So
and there's like you said, there's another great reference. This movie references so many horror movies of the days where you had like the man against nature things, where like things like piranhas, like swarms of creature would attack you. Jaws, the scene in there, and they would go and have other movies like Night of the Lupus or Willard with all the rats, and I would think about how these swarms of creatures would go after people. And
what was the movie with the Michael Jackson theme song about the rats?
That was Ben. That was the follow up to Willard.
So yeah, I mean, you had a lot of this kind of stuff, and just the scenes that you're supposed to be afraid of were just so ridiculous, but they were ridiculous in a good way. Like, they're obviously just throwing tomatoes at a car at one point, but you're supposed to believe that tomatoes are like launching themselves at the car and attacking these people.
Suicidal tomatoes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just, the whole idea is wonderful. And then it turns out that the press, spoiler alert, the press secretary is the bad guy, and he's behind the whole plot. And just as the CIA agent Mason Dixon is going to get, how he's gotten the tomatoes to follow his lead, Finletter comes in and kills the guy, so which is just, you're waiting for the classic villain monologue, and then they deny it to us, which is just
because I love how Dixon is just trembling, holding the gun, just wanting to shoot Finletter so bad for we had the solution.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And then the funniest part is the tomatoes, Achilles heel is just some horrible schlocky 70s pop song. It was like Puberty Love or something, I think it's called.
Yeah, Puberty Love. And again, I feel like not only was this movie enjoying making fun of its influences, but I feel like it influenced a lot of other things. I couldn't help but flash back to Tim Burton's Mars Attacks, where the Martians are defeated with really terrible music.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And it's like, you almost want to interview Tim Burton and be like, were you influenced by Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? So, and I would not be surprised if he was. I mean, so when we talk about this movie, is it the best movie in the world? No. Is it production value high? No. Is it funny? Heck yeah. Was it influential? Heck yeah. I think a lot of people have seen it. It's a cult classic. And I think it established a lot of things for the genre going forward. It's just so much fun. And I think that's why it's important for modern audiences, for me, because I think it's a look back at some cinema history. It's a look back. It's a cult classic, which is always fun. Those types of movies are always fun to experience the way they were experienced back in the day. So if you remake it, you're never going to recreate what you got from that original film. I mean, how could you, even the helicopter crash? I mean, that is such a fortuitous thing that happened. That's part of the lore of this movie. I
mean, the best thing you can do is really the only thing you can do if you wanted to do something even similar is you've got to have that kind of humor. You've got to pay close attention to the sort of verbal jokes and sight jokes that are in movies like this and in movies produced by Zuckers, Abrams, and Zucker. Just I love how they would have things going on in the background, things going on in the foreground, clever wordplay. The what's the poop on? Reminds me of the whole over eager Roger under what? That's the thing. Or like you said, even like going back to Mel Brooks, where he's serving the Last Supper, and Mel Brooks is going in History of the World Part 1 is like Jesus, and Jesus keeps going what clever little gags like that, and that might be the way to go and the only way to go. But there's just a fun level of absurdity to things they're doing, like taking two members of their team who are underwater specialists and putting them out in the desert.
Yeah. And then she traipses on in, and then she's in a fountain, and that's the last of you see of her. She's going around a fountain or something.
Out in the desert, she gets killed by tomatoes. The guy who's actually in full on scuba gear, he goes to the fountain. That's the end of him. But the Russian defector, steroid queen swimming champion, she's out in the desert the whole movie.
And then the guy goes undercover with the tomatoes, and they're around the campfire. Oh, just
I'm not going to spoil that line. It's too great.
Yeah, there's a whole era of movies around this time that it's worth checking out because it was irreverent, it was funny. They said things that I don't even think you could get away with anymore. For example, in Airplane, the captain, who was played by, and I can't remember his name, he was a very serious actor, but at one point,
was it Robert Stack?
Yeah, who was in Mission Impossible and everything. He comes up to a kid comes up to the cockpit, and he looks at me and goes, "Tell me, do you like gladiator movies?" So it's
I'm sorry, Richard Stack is the guy who moves through the airport. The other flight captain beats up the Hare Krishnas. I don't remember the Mission Impossible guy, his name offhand. But it's just that, and it's funny because as a kid I didn't get the gay joke in there.
Yeah,
and that whole thing, but you go back and look at it. And that's something that's fun about these movies. It's just like when you watch Looney Tunes as a kid, because those cartoons were actually made for adults. They premiered before movies. And so they talked about the celebrities and topics of the time, whether it was World War II or the Great Depression or celebrity culture at the time. There's you'll see Edward G. Robinson in popping up in Looney Tunes. They make fun of him and stuff like that. And so this is the same thing. You can not get the jokes as a kid and go back and watch these movies years later and really have a whole new appreciation for them.
And to be fair, there have been a lot of other things since then that are like that. It's just become sort of a dying art recently, but I'm hoping we'll get back to it. But even TV shows, cartoons like the Animaniacs or even SpongeBob, they have jokes in them that hit on many levels. They're funny with the kids, but there's a subtle joke in there that is for the adults that are watching them as well, which is why a lot of adults like watching those cartoons as well. I mean,
so they've blended the two together. I mean, there's an episode of Powerpuff Girls where the professor is talking about my girls were created by an accident. The little girl they have over to play is my mommy and daddy said I was an accident too. And the professor just looks at the camera oh. So there's a moment for the adults in there. And one of the things I really appreciate about this film is it did really kind of break ground for the horror comedy. And there were so many fun ones that I grew up with, especially in the 80s, Student Bodies was a particular favorite of mine. I'll never forget watching this. One of my favorite bits in any comedy is I'm watching this movie. I have no idea what it's about. I'm just, this horror comedy is ridiculous, ripping on the slasher genre. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the film, the screen goes, the signal, all this comes up. Yeah, we used not to have 24-hour movies and stuff. And I was like, oh man, the signal. When am I going to get a chance to see this movie again? And all of a sudden, it breaks into the voice of the killer, and he's like, "Hey, everybody, it's Breather. Who do you think I am? Who do you think I'm going to kill next?" And I love the bit. The bit was hysterical, and it's so comedy that's so self-aware like that. And there was a great comedy with one of the Smothers Brothers and Pee Wee Herman in a horror comedy, and this whole genre that just kind of spawned off of this movie is just delightful. Check them all out.
It's funny you bring up The Breather, because The Breather got his start as a bit player in Elvira and is actually in the movie Macabre version of this movie. And all of that comes back to the Groundlings, which she was a part of a improv troupe. And not only was The Breather part of that, I think, but Pee Wee Herman was part of it. Paul Rubens was in the Groundlings.
Yeah,
so
I mean, like the original SNL cast, so many of them came from the Groundlings.
Yep.
Belushi, Murray, Chevy Chase, I think, as well.
Also, oh God, now I'm going to kill myself for remembering the guy. He died tragically. It was a murder-suicide with his wife. No, not Norm Macdonald. Oh gosh.
Oh, Phil Hartman.
Phil Hartman. Yeah. Phil Hartman.
It's tragic.
Tragic ending, but very funny man. He was part of the Groundlings, So yeah, just some amazingly talented people came out of that group, even people that I forget her last name, but her first name, her last name was McClurg. I remember her most as the secretary in Ferris Bueller, but she was in the Elvira movie and a bunch of other stuff. And just an incredibly funny woman as well. Mm-hmm. So just so much came out of that troupe. But, we digress. That's the type of humor we're talking about. And it just, it was all over Hollywood with so many talented people. Has a lot of influence from the gay community, from the drag and everything like that. It was a big part of building this type of humor, so it is historical as well. It's worth checking out. Drag shows and the gay community were huge influences in the 70s and early 80s, maybe even into the 90s on the satire scene, the satirical comedy parodies and stuff like that.
I look at this period of humor. I feel like this is the classic Americana cinema or televised humor. Mm-hmm. And because the Zucker brothers are still doing it. Mm-hmm. They've taken over the Scary Movie franchise from the Wayanses, and it's still out there. It hasn't had quite the staying power of its contemporary in Britain. That classic British humor, but I feel like this is the American equivalent.
Definitely, I think that's such an amazing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's such an amazing comment. I never really thought about it, but it really is. It is the American version of the British, their dry humor, their Monty Python type sketches, Faulty Towers, and that type of stuff. So, whereas
we tend to like the zany a little mm-hmm. bit more, and the deeply sarcastic and a much more sort of extemporaneous, just really exploitive out there sort of way, where as opposed to the Brits having that dry, biting, sarcastic way.
Yeah. And to be fair, since this is Comic Crusaders, I mean, this is the kind of humor that inspired things like Deadpool. So you look at what Ryan Reynolds is doing, who's Canadian. We won't hold that against him.
Level of absurdity.
Yeah. So that is exactly what we're talking about. And you know what? To be fair, I think it'll come back. I think that we're at a time now where that kind of comedy is going to be on the rise again, because people.
I tell you, we really need it. It's a shame to see how comedies have dropped off, because frankly, people are afraid of making comedies. I mean, like the guy who did the what was the Hangover movies. Mm-hmm. He dropped out of doing comedies because they're like, oh man, it's just people are too outraged to do a comedy. So I'll make the Joker. I'll make a really dark film about mental illness.
Yeah, but I think one of the things, and real quick for modern audiences, I think this is important as well, is that you need to understand the time that these movies came out of. The 70s were a really hard time for the United States. We were ending Vietnam. Mm-hmm. We had huge inflation. We went into recession, which carried, the recession went well into Reagan's first term, before the economy really started to turn around. Things were really tough. People needed to laugh. They needed to laugh at themselves.
Absolutely.
And they needed to laugh at the absurdity of the world around them. Otherwise, people were going to, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, and then things are going to be bad, even worse. So I think, you look at what's going on in the world now. I think people need to laugh again, and I think it's going to come back because of that. So
I would welcome some stellar comedies.
Yeah. Man, this was just such an awesome conversation. So let's wrap it up. If you had to grade, let's do 2 grades here. Let's do first. Let's do the grade of the film itself, and then we're going to grade it a different way. So, if you're grading it as a critic on the film itself, what would you give this film?
Let's see. Taking it at my most objective, all the component parts. I'm going to say a 6.5. It's enjoyable. It's charming. It's got some production value, but not a tremendous amount. Some of a couple of the actors are really stand out. It's very good. The rest are kind of mediocre to just like bottom of the barrel, even though that plays into the film of what you said. So 6.5. It'll never be my favorite movie of all time, but it is definitely a movie that I will watch many times over the course of my life.
So looking back at the film, when I thought about it in my head, I was like, this was not a good film. I was going to give it a really low score. But then I looked back at it, that they had some musical numbers. They did some interesting shots.
Mm-hmm.
They had some stuff that is very daring for a low budget film, like featuring actual, the airplane and the helicopter and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
That takes some skill to coordinate that and film it and get it right. Even though the helicopter crashed, they got it on film. They got it on film, and it was shot.
And the actors didn't blow the take.
Yeah, it was shot correctly and kept in focus and the whole time, which is amazing, if you think about it.
And really, that crash being perfectly in frame and the cameraman keeping the frame the whole time.
Yeah.
That's
that almost gave it another point in and of itself, because to find out that was a real crash and it was perfectly shot the whole time, that's incredible. It almost makes you think it was just a static camera on a pole, or something. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they could do it. Wouldn't have stayed in focus and been right if it had been like that. So because of that, I think I'd give it a solid 5. I think I'd give it a solid 5. So on average, I think we would give it like a 5.7. I think on IMDb they're at like a 4.7, and I think that's fair.
We're above their average for a change.
Yeah. I think a lot of what probably happens is that's probably down because people don't really have an appreciation for the movie and everything that went into it, because it's so, it is an older film, so I think that's a fair reason why we're above it. And so, but I think that's a good score. And I think the score is probably right around where we're at, or in the middle somewhere.
It is all subjective. I go back and I watch, I'm still a big fan of things like Charlie Chaplin, Marx Brothers, Three Stooges. And for me, that humor still holds up, and not just because I grew up watching those things. I think it's legitimately funny, but it's not going to track with everybody from generation to generation. So that's fair.
Definitely. So that said, I want to go back and I want us to do a different rating. I want us to rate the film on entertainment factor, because this is one of those films that we talk about sometimes, and there's a lot of them out there where there are films that are so bad or whatever it is that they bring to that you just enjoy it. So it's not the greatest film ever made, but it entertains you and you enjoy watching it. So from an entertainment standpoint, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate this film?
Yeah, for a film that I'll probably watch, like once every 10 years, I give it a solid 8. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy especially coming back to it after a long period. So I've forgotten enough that I kind of rediscover it all over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Looking back on it, it's like the musical numbers were completely lost on me a long time ago, but looking at them now and appreciating them, just really funny. The stuff with the ad executive and the scrolling stuff along the bottom, which was all about selling stuff, funny as hell. The political stuff, entertaining and funny as hell. Didn't get it before. So I would give it a solid 7.5. you know. And like I said, I haven't watched this movie. I know I haven't watched this movie since I was in high school. So that's like 1988. So I'm dating myself. You know, I graduated. I didn't graduate in 88. I graduated a year later, but I think I may have watched it with my buddies in 88. So,
that's right. You only just turned 50. I'm getting ready to turn 53. Youngster.
Hey, I don't feel young. Not today anyway, but it's my own fault. You know, just between you and me in the kitchen, I was playing one of those games last night where it was like one more turn. Suddenly it was 3 o'clock in the morning. So,
all right, everybody out there watching, that's just between the two of us. Remember.
So, so I would say 7.75 for entertainment value. That's about right. You know, I think it was a movie I'd want to watch every week. Probably not. It would get old, but you know, to dig up every now and then out of the archives and enjoy, it's a fun movie. So I would recommend it. So cool. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for making it. I'm glad the tomatoes can get you. You turned them into ketchup. So
that's right. They're going on my burgers tonight.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope all of you enjoyed this episode of Cinema Crusaders. Check us out on the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel. Check out Jeff on Twitter. He's open for commissions, I know. So Jeff Bracey.
It's Bracey452.
Bracey452. Check him out. Please check out ASAP Comics, all the stuff we're doing over there. We've got some great news. I can't release it for you yet, but I got some stuff coming out for ASAP soon. So you see that on Twitter as well at NemesisFC2. So, and until then, next week we're going to be doing The Thing by John Carpenter. So make sure you check that out. We also have interview with Omen Comics Michael Nunnally that's going to be part of it, and we have an interview on the 22nd with. I'll let Jeff announce this one.
Ben Templesmith, the artist of the legendary 30 Days of Night, and who has gone on to be not just a horror artist, but also a really great horror writer in his own right, having done books like Wormwood and Welcome to Hoxford, and his sci-fi book Singularity 7. And Ben's a really sweet guy. I got to know him several years back when he was just really getting started, and I got to meet him in person just a couple of years ago. So really looking forward to having him on the show, guys. I know you're going to love him as much as I do.
Cool. So that's all coming up on Halloween Movie Madness, all leading up to the day itself, where we're going to have a movie film festival on our Discord, as well as some other things. So stay tuned. We're going to be having some giveaways coming up also in the coming weeks. So that's all going to be around. Hope you enjoy it. Until then, this is Cinema Crusaders. We're signing out.